Meow. Huples cat. I'm just doing a bit of a quick update from work. It's actually Sunday morning and the clocks are going forward, so I only have to work 11 hours, not 12, so I'm very hyper excited about that. But there's always the question, will people show up for work in the morning on time? They don't tend to at the best of times. So I did a bit of an update video for Brad on full spectrum survival because he's asked a few of us just to sort of basically say who we are and where we are. The people that are actually talking to him about some stuff, questions and stuff. But I just wanted to let you know what's going on right now. We are still in containment. That means most of the cases are from abroad, from one of the countries where they've got local spread. And there are 15 countries in the world where they have local spread. There's 94 countries total that actually have COVID-19 cases. So most of the cases came from the 15 countries, and we're seeing certainly Chinese, and then we saw Iranian, and we have in fact seen Egyptian cases of COVID-19 in the Greater Toronto area. And what we're seeing over the GTA over the Saturday, March 7th, and actually a week really, is a gradual but slow and steady and obvious upswing in patients coming to our emergency departments across the GTA who may have COVID-19, and we are screening them. We're doing what we can to protect our staff and other patients from possible contamination. Interestingly, right now I have 3, which is no big deal. But if we get 6 or if we get 9 for sure, at that point I would then have to start pulling people out of negative pressure rooms on the floor who don't need them and moving them to unconventional areas because it's Saturday night and I don't have any beds. Our emergency department has admitted patients with no beds who are on stretchers in common corridors, hallways basically, with the lights on all the time, people walking back and forth, and it's not great. It's not great at the best of time. It's underfunded. The healthcare system's been underfunded for an awfully long time in Toronto and around the world, and no surprise that this infectious outbreak is not something we're anticipating as doing us any favours. So what we've seen is a huge upswing in walking worried, people who don't have any symptoms at all, who think for whatever reason they might have COVID-19 and they want to be tested, and we're not testing them. But unfortunately they are coming to our emergency departments because we still do not have on March 8th anywhere else for them to go in Toronto, and that's a government failure. Simply put, unless you are emergently ill, you shouldn't be coming to an emergency department to find out if you have COVID-19 disease, because let's be honest, emergency departments are full of sick people and the immunocompromised. It's the last place people should be going. I'm confident the government will get its act together this week about that, but it should have got its act together about this 3 or 4 weeks ago. What we're really seeing is an increase, other than the walking worried, is an increase in people coming with fever. Pretty much every single nursing home out there is sending anybody with any sort of a temperature to the nearest emergency department. So there is that element of fear and concern that's increasing volume load into the emergency departments, and that's not great. And I guess over time that will mitigate as those people actually do develop COVID-19 disease. We are expecting that. Canada has, like I said, 51 cases. I'm expecting us to have at least 100 cases by this time next week. We'll see. Hopefully not. And as I always say on my channel, don't get too involved in the numbers. The numbers are kind of irrelevant. What's important is, can we stop the spread of this flu-like disease within our own communities so we don't have to go into lockdown? Because the only way to actually stop spread is lockdown. So anybody that's sick needs to home quarantine. If you have facial hair, you need to get it off, and you need to carry an N95. So if you come upon somebody who's obviously sick, you can put the mask on. Some people out there are saying the most outrageous things like, I'm young and healthy, if I get it, it doesn't matter. No, children, babies, young adults can catch it and can die from this. It's just more common to die from it if you're older and sicker. But the other problem I have with that on a moral level is that you are creating a chain of infection. If I catch the infection but I think I'll be fine, I then have a higher likelihood of passing that infection along to other human beings who might catch it from me and die. So it's an immoral stance to say, it doesn't matter, we're all going to get it, I don't care, it's a waste of time, I'll just not take any precautions. So me and Kitty both washing our hands so much, it's really becoming a bit of a problem. And like I said, I'm going to have to start carrying decent hand cream because it's becoming a problem, right? And if you break the skin gets chapped or blistered, you've lost that protective barrier. This sort of a thing, if you're going to panic buy, get hand cream. I really advise that. because panic buying is breaking out all over the GTA. There is definitely shortages starting to occur. Now it's caused mostly because people are overbuying supplies rather than the fact that supplies aren't arriving. Except for things like hand sanitizer and face masks, that's becoming quite the issue. And one of my issues tonight that I have, I'm the only manager in a major teaching hospital in downtown Toronto. I have to deal with anything that goes wrong and put the fires out. So one of the fires I had tonight is kind of an interesting one, and I'll explain it. So when I glance over here, it's because I'm actually looking at the emails about this, but basically the emergency charge nurse called me and said that they had a possible PUI, person of interest, person under investigation down in the emergency department. The emergency doctors had identified that person as being at risk. The person has not been outside of Canada since January and came from China, and so the infection prevention control person on call said, no, just treat it like droplet. The doctor disagrees because of the clinical presentation, and so do the nursing staff, and I think this is a really key part here, and they are treating it as if a potential COVID-19 disease is there. And so we are doing testing now, which is great. Physicians are now able to order the testing, which is great. So we'll have that result back probably by tomorrow afternoon. It'll probably come back negative, a lot of them do. So my concern is, are those types of patients going to actually have the serial 3 testing? I don't know, hopefully. But one of the interesting things was, what we're saying is that N95s don't work, which isn't true, they do, and you only need them for intubation or aerosol generating activities or taking the nose swabs. Now we know we're going to run out of N95s as this becomes big, we know that. So we're trying to restrict the use of them. So the emerged nurses for this particular patient are insisting upon wearing N95s for all contact in the bay. It's a sealed room and they've got negative pressure for this down there. Whereas the infection prevention control were telling them you don't need N95s for this. I found that very interesting. So I actually alerted the risk management team at home just to say basically, hey, this has gone on before I knew about it. But my stance is that no member of staff can wear less than what IPNC is mandating, but if the emerge nurses choose to wear higher level of protection, I'm 100% supporting it, and I'm not going to support anybody who attempts to tell them to take it off. That we should listen to and understand the intuition and ability of clinically excellent emerge nurses to make competent decisions even if they're outside of guidelines. As long as they're not taking lower level, I'm fine with them taking high level. So that was an interesting one. So the conversation went back and forth, and the bottom line was, yeah, it's the middle of the night, so I'm not coming in to tell them to take their masks off. Good luck trying to tell them to take their masks off, by the way. And the unions might get involved, so yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I don't really care whether it's fine or not. I'm not actually ordering somebody to remove protective equipment that they feel they need. Now, one of the issues with this is going to be, and I pointed this out, is that when we ask staff to actually go into single rooms, whether negative pressure or not, with patients who are known to be COVID-19 and tell them that they don't need an N95, a face mask, a surgical mask is good enough, when everybody knows that a surgical face mask does almost nothing to protect you, I think we might find resistance. And I'm not altogether sure that I'm able to order people to do that type of care in those sorts of circumstances, because Canada, like most industrial countries, has spent millions of dollars on emergency planning. You know, we have emergency planners here at a whole department here, and given the fact that a pandemic was inevitable, the fact that they did not stockpile N95 masks and just relied on a provincial stockpile, which it turns out isn't good enough because there isn't enough in it, because they weren't anticipating it everywhere. They were looking at SARS 2003, an outbreak in 1 or 2 hospitals, in which case it would have been fine, but they didn't plan for nor anticipate every hospital requiring a large increase in supplies of personal protective equipment. Well, they didn't plan for that, and they've had at least 8 weeks now to fix that gap, and they need to fix that gap, and it's not acceptable just to go, well, we can't do anything about it now. So rationing is happening. So one of the other issues tonight is a different one. They put out surgical masks in the emerge department for visitors and patients who are coming to emerge to just take and put on if they have a cold or whatever, and for some reason those masks are disappearing. People are taking 5, 6, 7, 10 at a time. So one of the things I've told them to do is to remove those masks, and to hand the mask to patients who require it at triage. And if the patient requires a visitor who needs the mask, then to hand it to them. In other words, it's going to be a nursing decision to hand that mask to the patient or the visitor. If visitors want masks to visit and it's not appropriate, they don't visit. They're more than welcome to leave, go and buy some masks on eBay or whatever, if they can, and then visit. It's not our job to provide personal protective equipment for members of the public if we don't need them to be present with the patient, or if the patient has no indication for the mask. I totally get why people are worried and why they want to put a surgical mask on, but the surgical mask will only protect me and the nurses from their infection. It's not actually protecting them anyway. If they're that worried, they probably shouldn't be in an emergency department. Now, I like to call them hyper-alarmists, and you know who they are. Mostly they're bearded still, because they don't care about anybody else, and they martial law this, martial law that, and that's all stuff and nonsense. What they're talking about is lockdowns. Now, Lombardy, northern Italy, is locking down about 11 million people, using the police to enforce it. If anybody tries to get in or out of that region, they're going to face up to 3 months in jail. That is good. It's extreme and it's draconian, but it keeps the outbreak to a specific geographical area, forces people in that area to actually really limit contact, and actually can help control it. That's what's happened in China and Wuhan City, and it's took weeks to do that. So we're looking at outbreaks. If an outbreak becomes big enough, we're looking at the end of public transport, we're looking at the end of free movement out of that zone. And I think that's reasonable, given the fact that this pandemic, if it progressed to the level it could progress to, will result in millions of deaths, and I don't think that's fair. We need to actually do everything we can, irregardless of the economic and political outcome, to make sure that we limit the spread of the disease locally, and if we can't stop it spreading locally, which we are failing to do in America and Canada, what we need to do is to make sure that local spread is contained as much as possible. And the best way is enforced removal of transport, not enforced quarantine. Enforced quarantining doesn't really work. Enforced mask wearing in public also doesn't really work. It's always much better if people are voluntarily encouraged to, by huge pressure, to do these things. Their compliance will be higher. The other thing we're doing now is, when I came in on Friday, there was a bunch of emails asking for one of our float nurses, which is a nurse that works in different areas of the hospitals, to go to the emerge department and take an emerge nurse's job, so the emerge nurse could work in the frontal zone of the emergency department as a screener for COVID-19 coming in, because we're having so many walking wounded and all the rest of it. It sounded like a great idea, and it is a great idea, and that's one of the things we learned from SARS in 2003, is that we were literally using high school students as screeners. That was not effective. So there was a whole bunch of emails back and forth. So what I did was I contacted the people who were here till 9 o'clock on Friday and said, this is the hospital priority. If we have float nurses available, nursing resource team, the first one that we have available will go to emerge to relieve emerge, so emerge can screen. That's a priority for now, for the weekend through to Monday. That's it for me, except to say that I did inform Kitty that the government of Canada is telling her to consider going to outdoor exercise rather than indoor exercise. So now she's desperately upset because she loves her yoga, but I think she might want to start thinking about doing that. I've been asking her not to. This is Huples Cat at work. I'm going to lie down now because I'm really tired. Toodles. That was a Bad Terrier 2020 production.